This must be horrible for a guy like you, who you spent your whole life talking about how government tries to do too much, which it does, and spends too much. And here you have Trump, who is the Republican, who is aggrandizing more power than anybody, as we just talked about. And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win?
Yeah. I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need
Is this going to be a country that I don't recognize in 5 to 10 years if we don't have these two pillars? If we don't, where are the Democrats going with this? If Mamdani is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that.
Bill Maher is taking direct aim at Zohran Mamdani. And this time, the alarm he's raising is impossible to dismiss. Look, this isn't just another loud voice from the progressive wing. This is a politician steering New York towards steeper taxes, expanded government, and open contempt for private ownership. His argument is straightforward. If this represents the direction of democratic politics in America's largest city, the threat is already visible. And once ideas like these shift from campaign rhetoric into actual governance, the real-world consequences arrive with alarming speed. So, if you're ready for the complete breakdown, let's dive right in.
He just brought up. That's who you're all going to have to answer for. So I got to get your answer. This is Mamdani. If you've been not following the news, he won the Democratic primary in New York, so he is certainly likely to be the next mayor. We don't know. I mean, there's a lot of opposition because we've never had someone this radical. Some of the things he says, prisons were obsolete. What purpose do they serve? I can think of a couple. The NYPD is racist, anti-queer, and a major threat to public safety. I think most people think cops are protecting their public safety, even though there's issues and problems with the police department. Do you like capitalism? No. We've never had a guy quite like this. He quotes Marxist, each according to their need. I mean, that's straight up communism. Whether you call it the abolition of private property, you call it housing guarantees, it's preferable to what is going on right now.
Maher was sounding the alarm on Mamdani long before the election cycle picked up momentum. And right now, that warning is starting to look increasingly prescient. He identified the warning signs early, particularly the brand of politics that appears empathetic on the surface, but ultimately leaves taxpayers bearing the full burden. Remember when he cautioned Democrats against blindly rallying behind Kamala Harris? They brushed it off, convinced they had everything figured out, and they paid the political price. That is precisely why this matters. Maher has a pattern of detecting the flaws in a political strategy before everyone else is forced to reckon with the damage. And if he turns out to be right again, Mamdani's ascent may become the next self-inflicted wound Democrats fail to stop before it's too late.
Is this going to be a country that I don't recognize in 5 to 10 years if we don't have these two pillars? If we don't, where are the Democrats going with this? If Mamdani is the face of the Democrats on the East Coast and Katie Porter is the face on the West Coast, I don't know if that's great politically for that.
And no, this isn't simply bad strategy for Democrats. In Maher's view, it is bad news for the entire nation when one of the two major parties begins building its future around tax and spend radicalism. With Mamdani gaining ground on the East Coast and more hard-left energy drawing national attention, the party appears to be gravitating toward a platform rooted more in redistribution than in practical solutions. That is not merely a political realignment. It is the kind of imbalance that can warp the entire national dialogue. America functions best when both parties compete with serious, grounded policy, not when one side begins romanticizing approaches that penalize achievement, breed dependency, and label it all as justice. What's needed is a Democratic Party capable of challenging Republicans with common sense, not one that continuously wraps extreme tax politics in the language of morality. There is still a path back, but only if the party rediscovers what once gave it credibility: freedom, pragmatism, and balance. Right now, it appears to be surrendering all three in exchange for ideology. And if that trajectory continues, the damage won't stop at the party level. It will threaten the stability of the system itself.
Let me tell you about the story that liberal algorithms locked out. Her name is Sia Weaver, and if you ask anyone in the blue sky bubble who that is, they'll look at you like a turkey looking up at the rain. But she's kind of important in New York, being Major Mamdani's chief of the Office to Protect Tenants, and since Mamdani's big issue is the rent's too damn high, yes, he stole this guy's act. It's a very key appointment in the most important city in the country, which is also our financial center. It matters that the mayor stands by, and so I assume stands with, someone who says things like, if you don't believe in the government's sacred right to seize private property.
And yes, this is precisely the kind of rhetoric that triggers Maher's sharpest reactions. Framing private property as a problem is not just provocative language. It is the vocabulary that underlies a much deeper tax and control mentality. And that is why this moment carries so much weight. Once voices within your political circle begin speaking as though ownership itself is the enemy, the conversation is no longer about reform. It becomes about power. In Maher's view, that is the true signal. A radical tax agenda does not simply stop at higher rates and increased spending. It begins treating private ownership, individual achievement, and economic independence as obstacles to be squeezed, regulated, and redistributed. That is the source of his alarm. Because when rhetoric like this edges closer to actual authority, the facade falls away, and what remains is not practical governance. It is ideological control wrapped in polished presentation.
Seize private property. Home ownership is racist. Elect more communists. Private property, especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy. Really? Even among the 20 million Black Americans who own their own home? I mean, these are the kind of utterances I might forgive as something a dumb white girl said while she was at Bryn Mawr. Because it's the kind of privilege hating you can only learn for $95,000 a year. But these are statements made as an adult. Yes, for co-eds from elite private colleges, you're only a lesbian until graduation, but the communism lasts a lifetime.
That is also why Maher views Mamdani as something far more significant than a single local New York politician. To him, Mamdani represents a signal that a visible segment of the Democratic coalition is becoming increasingly comfortable with radical tax politics, redistribution, and government-heavy solutions. And that is what gives this debate national significance. If that kind of agenda is now being rewarded and normalized in a city like New York, then the problem is no longer confined to one place. It becomes a preview of what the party may attempt to promote across the country next. Because what sounds noble in activist language often translates very differently to ordinary voters who receive one message loud and clear: you will pay more, government will control more, and somehow you are still expected to call that progress. Maher's warning is that the more Democrats treat that instinct as courage, the more they alienate the very voters they still need to win back.
One of the things that we've said, beyond saying that we're going to make this a sanctuary city for LGBTQIA plus New Yorkers, beyond saying that we're going to establish an office of LGBTQIA plus affairs, is also that we're going to provide $65 million in funding for gender affirming care, the same amount of funding that the federal government was threatening to pull out from local providers for that kind of work. And in this moment especially, if we want to fight the Trump administration, we have to do so by fully funding our own services, taxing the wealthiest New Yorkers and corporations.
And this is precisely why Maher sees Mamdani as the kind of figure who could damage Democrats from within. He understands that when the party drifts too far to the left, it begins pushing away the moderates it depends on to survive. Especially when that drift arrives with a tax-heavy agenda and deeply polarizing spending priorities. A substantial portion of Donald Trump's support came from voters reacting against progressive overreach on cultural issues. And now Mamdani is backing a $65 million plan to expand gender-affirming care, with his policy memo reportedly outlining support for both transgender youth and adults. That is not merely a political gamble. It is a clear example of how this broader agenda operates. More spending, more ideological signaling, and another bill passed along to the public. That is why Maher sees it as a political advantage handed directly to Republicans and a flashing indicator that the left is losing its grip on restraint, priorities, and the everyday voter.
It must be horrible for a guy like you, who you spent your whole life talking about how government tries to do too much, which it does, and spends too much. And here you have Trump, who is the Republican, who is aggrandizing more power than anybody, as we just talked about. And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win.
On the surface, it all appears quite appealing. Gentle language, moral branding, sweeping promises, and the kind of politics that makes a radical tax agenda feel like compassion in action. But the moment you look past the slogans, the entire vision starts to unravel. Mamdani's platform may energize idealists, but to anyone who has watched these ideas collapse before, it carries a painfully familiar feeling. It is the same old formula dressed in newer packaging. That is Maher's core argument. The branding sounds fresh, but the underlying instinct remains unchanged. Tax more, control more, and hope that reality cooperates with the plan.
It is the dead of winter, another snowstorm is coming, and homeless encampments are still a critical problem in Mayor Mamdani's New York. So how is the mayor going to deal with it? Political reporter Marcia Kramer took her questions to Mamdani in this story that you will see here only on CBS News New York.
They are an eyesore. CBS News New York discovering homeless encampments, 2 on the Upper West Side, 2 in Hell's Kitchen, with many wondering how the new mayor will deal with the twin problems of finding a humane solution and optics that make it look like the city is out of control. This man, afraid to show his face, says he's called 311 repeatedly about the 2 encampments on West 45th Street.
They take the call like they're supposed to, but nothing's really happening.
How do you feel about the fact that nothing's happening?
Well, I don't feel good about it because I've been in this neighborhood for 3 decades.
And then you arrive at the part that no amount of spin can easily deflect. What happens when cities spend more, promise more, and still lose command of basic public order? You can already observe how homelessness is placing mounting pressure on a place that once marketed itself as the emblem of opportunity, ambition, and upward mobility. Even prominent outlets like CBS have documented the encampments, the strain on public resources, and the frustration of residents watching this crisis expand in full public view. That is why critics are sounding the alarm, because they have already witnessed this same cycle in places where taxes remained high, spending kept climbing, and outcomes still failed to match the promises. Many now fear New York is drifting toward that identical model, where residents are asked to contribute more while disorder continues to spread regardless. And Maher's warning is blunt and direct. If a radical tax agenda keeps expanding while core problems keep deepening, people stop interpreting it as compassion. They start recognizing it as failure.
I think every 20 years or so,
Wait.
we need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again. Socialist slogan used to be, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. The new socialist slogan is, trust us, this time it won't be a mess.
Socialism has collapsed so many times that most people want nothing to do with it, particularly when it resurfaces disguised as yet another tax-heavy rescue plan. The only reason it continues returning is because every new generation gets pitched the same utopian vision in slightly more polished packaging. But the fundamental problem with socialism is not simply greed. It is human nature. People require incentives to build, compete, innovate, and create. Remove those incentives, flatten outcomes, and assume that government can tax, manage, and regulate its way to fairness, and productivity begins deteriorating almost immediately. Bureaucracy expands, corruption takes hold, and the system that pledged equality begins delivering stagnation, inefficiency, and widespread resentment instead. History has already conducted this experiment far too many times. It never concludes the way it is advertised. That is why Mamdani's handout-heavy, government-driven tax agenda may read as compassionate on paper, but in practice, it begins breaking down rapidly. And once economic freedom starts eroding, progress erodes right alongside it. And ultimately, everyone ends up paying the cost.
Resolution, here's one. Get out of your media bubble. The most frustrating thing that happens to me whenever I'm off is people I run into want me to do my job, which I'm on vacation from, privately in restaurants and at parties, and, well, the bathhouse is a separate situation. But look, I'm happy to share my opinions wherever, except for this. Everybody, left and right, is only half informed.
That is why Maher's closing message reaches beyond Mamdani, beyond New York, and beyond any single election cycle. He is urging people to step outside their echo chambers and begin evaluating ideas based on results rather than branding. But his warning is directed especially at the left, because too many people now exist inside sealed ideological loops where every new tax proposal is framed as compassion, every criticism is dismissed as fear, and every disappointing outcome gets rationalized rather than confronted. Maher's point is that this is precisely how people become not just misinformed, but confidently misinformed. Once disagreement starts appearing threatening, facts stop being evaluated on their merits and begin getting filtered through ideology. And no democracy remains healthy when slogans replace scrutiny, when spending substitutes for solutions, and when evidence surrenders to emotional politics. That kind of echo chamber thinking doesn't merely weaken the left, it blinds it to the true cost of the very agenda it keeps championing. If you found value in this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and share your perspective in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.